Most campers today carry about 30 feet of paracord and figure that covers it. Maybe a carabiner or two. A few half hitches that they half remember from a scout meeting 15 years ago. And honestly, for a weekend trip where everything goes according to plan, that might be enough. But the mountain men who moved through the Rockies, the Appalachians, and the northern wilderness were not working with paracord and carbines. They were working with rawhide, hemp rope, twisted cordage, leather strips, and whatever plant fibers they could process. They needed knots that held under load, worked with wet or frozen material, could be tied in the dark or in cold weather, and could be undone quickly when a situation changed. That is a completely different standard than tying off a hammock on a nice afternoon. Hit subscribe before we get into it, because this channel is about the practical side of old skills, not the romanticized version you see in every other frontier video. I'm Jerry Davis, and I've spent years studying the tools, routines, and practical knowledge that kept people alive in wilderness conditions before modern gear existed. Knot tying is one of those skills that sounds simple right up until the moment you actually need it. A bad knot on a loaded pack animal can lose your entire food supply. A slipped knot on a shelter ridge in a windstorm leaves you exposed in the middle of the night. A poorly tied bowline used as a rescue loop can tighten under load and cause serious injury. The knots in this video are not trivia. They are functional tools that mountain men, voyageurs, fur traders, and frontier builders used daily for rigging, building, packing, hunting, and survival. By the end, you will know which knots are worth learning cold and which ones are worth understanding even if you only use them occasionally. And I will tell you where each one actually came from, why it worked in real frontier conditions, and what it is still good for today. Let's start with the one that matters most. The bowline is the foundational rescue knot, and it has been used in one form or another across nearly every rope-working tradition in recorded history. What makes it valuable is that it creates a fixed loop that will not tighten under load. A slip knot tightens, a bowline holds its shape. If you are lowering a person down a slope, pulling an animal out of a muddy bank, or securing a load that needs to be released quickly, a tightening loop is a problem. A fixed loop is a solution. The trick with the bowline is that it does not hold well when the rope is moving in alternating directions, so it is not the right choice for rigging that bounces or vibrates constantly. Tie it correctly, learn to check it, and it is one of the most reliable knots in a working rope kit. The Clove hitch is next. And this one drove me a little crazy for a while because I kept hearing people call it a camp knot when it is really more of a starting knot. A Clove hitch is fast and adjustable, which makes it excellent for temporarily lashing a line to a tree, post, or pole. It is also a common starting point for more complex lashings. Where it fails is under sustained load in a single direction. The rope can walk along the post over time. Historical builders knew this. They used the Clove hitch to begin lashings, then finished with securing wraps that locked the whole thing in place. On its own, unsupported, a Clove hitch is a quick setup, not a permanent anchor. The timber hitch is the one that surprised me when I started researching how mountain men actually moved logs and poles. This knot grips tighter as you pull and releases easily when the tension comes off. You cannot tie a bowline around a log and drag it efficiently. The rope slides and the knot wanders. The timber hitch wraps around the material and self-tightens in the direction of drag. Frontier builders and trappers used this for moving heavy timber, pulling poles into position for shelter construction, and dragging downed wood back to camp without needing complex rigging. If you ever need to move a heavy log any meaningful distance, this knot is worth knowing before you need it. The sheet bend is specifically designed to join two ropes of different diameter or stiffness, and this matters more in a frontier context than most people realize. You were not always working with matched rope. A trapper might have one length of twisted hemp, a strip of dried rawhide, and a piece of braided cordage that needed to function as a single line. A simple square knot connecting two different ropes of different thickness is unreliable. It can work loose, especially when the ropes are wet and the material properties change. The sheet bend handles that mismatch. It works differently from a square knot and is structurally suited to the problem. If you are ever improvising rope from mixed materials in a genuine emergency, this is the knot that lets those materials work together. Which brings me to the square knot, and here is where I have to be direct about something. The square knot is one of the most misused knots in camping. People use it to join rope. It was designed primarily as a binding knot, meaning it holds a bundle of material against itself rather than joining two ropes under tension. Use a square knot to tie a bandage, bundle gear against a pack frame, or close a bag. Do not rely on it to join two lines that will be under sustained load. It can capsize, meaning the geometry of the knot collapses and the rope slips through with almost no warning. Mountain men used square knots constantly, but historical accounts of rigging and packing suggest they used them for binding, not for structural rope joins. That distinction has gotten people into trouble for a long time. The trucker's hitch, sometimes called the wagoner's hitch in older references, is a mechanical advantage knot system that lets one person tension a line far tighter than they could by simply pulling the rope. Period. Accounts of freighting, pack train management, and wagon travel described variations of this system for securing loads that had to survive rough terrain over long distances. A loosely tied load shifts, and a shifting load unbalances an animal or a vehicle. The trucker's hitch gives you leverage without a separate piece of hardware. It is not a single knot, but a combination of a loop in the line and a pair of half hitches that lock the tension in place. Learn this one as a system, not just a concept. The taut-line hitch is an adjustable knot, meaning you can slide it along the rope to increase or decrease tension after it is tied. This makes it ideal for shelter lines, particularly tarps and canvas shelters, where the material will shift and sag as temperature and humidity change overnight. Canvas absorbs moisture and stretches. A fixed knot, tied to perfect tension at dusk, can leave your shelter sagging into your face by midnight. Historical canvas camp setups dealt with this problem constantly. The taut-line hitch lets you make small adjustments without untying and retying the whole line. It grips under load and slides when you release the load. That one property makes it far more practical for shelter work than most people give it credit for. The figure 8 on a bight creates a fixed loop at the end of a rope or anywhere along a rope's length, and it is one of the most secure stopper knots available. Fur traders and voyageurs working rope systems on watercraft and portage rigs needed knots that would not pull through a ring or eye under load. A simple overhand knot can work loose or jam so tightly it cannot be undone after being loaded heavily. The figure 8 on a bight holds reliably, can be inspected visually to confirm it is correct, and comes undone more easily after loading than an overhand. It is also easy to teach. If you can walk someone through tying a figure 8, they can learn it in about 3 minutes. The sheepshank is a knot people tend to dismiss as a trick, and I understand why. It looks complicated, and the practical applications seem limited. But in a rope economy, which is exactly what frontier travel was, shortening a rope without cutting it, or temporarily bypassing a damaged section of cordage, was a genuine skill. If your main line had a frayed or weakened section in the middle, you needed a way to keep that section from bearing load. The sheepshank lifts that section out of the primary load path. Period texts on rigging and seamanship describe this knot for exactly that purpose. It does not hold permanently and should not be used as a long-term solution, but as a temporary field fix, it earned its place in the mountain man's kit. The lark's head, sometimes called the cow hitch, is one of the fastest attachment knots available. Loop the rope around a ring, stake, branch, or pole, and both ends come out the same side. It is a quick, load-bearing attachment for hanging gear, setting snare components, attaching bundles to pack frames, and rigging lines where speed matters more than a permanent set. Where it falls short is in shock loading or directional pull that shifts angle. Under stable load, in a consistent direction, it holds. If the load swings or the direction of pull changes frequently, it can walk loose. Shear lashing is worth understanding even if you never intend to build a primitive shelter, because it teaches the underlying logic of how poles can be joined to carry loads they could not handle individually. Two poles lashed at an angle with shear lashing create a crossed leg that can support a ridge pole. The wraps and frapping turns work together to prevent the poles from spreading under load. Frontier lean-tos, A-frame shelters, and temporary hunting camps used this principle constantly. The skill is less about the specific pattern and more about understanding that the frapping turns, the wraps that run perpendicular to the main lashing, are what actually lock the joint in place. Without the frapping turns, the main wraps can loosen over time. The last knot worth learning from this era is the prusik. This one came from mountaineering tradition, but the underlying mechanics, using a loop of thinner cord wrapped around a larger rope to create a grip that holds under load but slides when unloaded, appear in historical rigging practices going back further than formal mountaineering. In a camp setting, the prusik is genuinely useful for tensioning ridgelines, creating adjustable attachment points, and rigging systems where you need a grip that can be repositioned. Modern climbers use it as a safety system, but for general camp use, it is a reliable, adjustable grip on a loaded line. Here is what I want you to take away from all of this. Mountain men were not memorizing knots as a hobby. They were building a vocabulary of functional solutions to physical problems. Rope management, load securing, shelter rigging, and field repair were daily activities, not emergency skills. The more of these you can tie from muscle memory, the more solutions you have available when conditions are bad, your hands are cold, the light is gone, and you need the knot to work the first time. That is what these knots were built for. That is what they are still good for today. If this kind of practical history is useful to you, subscribe and leave a comment about which of these you have actually used in the field. I read every one of them.